May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable unto you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. I'm going to take a risk and tell a story this morning. A story about a valley that when it rained, the wash took all of the leaves and debris down from the mountainside, filled the stream that ran through the valley with water, brought with it silt and topsoil. It was a fertile valley to live in. And everyone who lived there in the small town in that valley were farmers. They never had any want. Each had their own little garden plot in their yard and grew whatever they needed to eat and feed themselves. But then there was the year that it didn't rain. And that year became 2 years, and the creek started to dry up, and the topsoil started to become depleted, and the gardens that they had depended on for so long stopped bearing fruit and vegetables, and the people became very hungry. There was one farmer named John who was a large, strong farmer. He did not need animals to plow his field. He was a big, strapping guy. He was, on account of that, perhaps even hungrier than the rest when the food ran out. And so in desperation, he went up into the hillsides surrounding the valley to forage and look for food. Well, on one of these foraging trips, he happened upon the mouth of a cave carved into a rock in the hillside. And as he went in, typically as you go into a cave, it gets darker and darker. But as he went into this cave, he saw more and more light, and he heard the sounds of water dripping. And he found there in this cave a spring welling up, and essentially this sunroof in the top where the sunlight came down. And there in the sunlight, in this cave by this spring, was the most beautiful garden he had ever seen. I mean, it was full of melons and beans and corn and tomatoes, zucchinis and squashes. I mean, just everything that he had been without. And so John did what any really hungry person would do. He just gorged himself and filled his pockets and as much as his arms could carry, and took this food home with him and filled his larders with it. And there came a knock on his door, and it was one of his neighbors who says, "We just ran out of the last little bits of our flour for bread, and my children are hungry, and I am hungry. Do you have anything that you can share with us?" And worried that if he began to share with one neighbor, he would have to share with all of his neighbors, and he needed the food so that he could eat and be well. And he says, "I only have enough for me. I am sorry." And he went back and nibbled on a tomato, and then another knock came on the door, and it was another neighbor asking if he could help, if he could share, if he had any extra food that they might be able to eat that evening. And he said, I've really only got just enough for me, and I'm a big guy, and I really don't have enough to share with you. And it got to the point that every time he heard a knock on the door, he would dread it. Because he didn't like turning people away, but he knew he had to do what was best for himself. He needed to provide for himself. And then, another knock. One of these knocks, when he opened the door, he was getting ready just to say, "Hey, go away, I can't help you, I've got nothing." But before he could open up his mouth. He realized there was this frail old man standing there with a wheelbarrow full of fruits and vegetables. The old man asked John, "Do you have need of any of this?" And John had just polished off the last of his tomatoes as he was snacking earlier, so he grabbed a few extra tomatoes from the cart and nodded at the old farmer, who then went to the next door neighbor and knocked on the door and did the same. And this old man would go around every evening with this wheelbarrow full of food and distribute to the neighbors. They were all amazed. Where is he getting this amazing food from? All of our gardens are dried out. And it occurred to John, he must be stealing from the garden I found in the cave. Right? And if he keeps giving away the food that I found in the garden to everyone else, pretty soon there's not going to be enough in that garden for me. So John went up to the garden one night when it was dark, and Big John found a big rock and just rolled it over the front of the cave, knowing that if it was the frail old man who was taking his food from the garden he had found in the cave, he wouldn't be able to move the rock aside and take any more of John's discovery. And sure enough, the next day, there was no old man with the wheelbarrow. And the day after that. And then the day after that. And then there was a knock on his door, but it wasn't the old man with the wheelbarrow. It was his neighbors again saying, "The food that the man had shared with us has run out. And I saw you in here eating and wondered if you had, any food that you could share with me." And, John was running a little bit low. He knew he was going to have to go back out to the cave and replenish his supply. So he said, "No, I don't really have enough to share right now." And that evening, John went back out to the cave to move the stone aside. And when he did, just on the other side of the entrance of the cave was the frail old man sleeping next to his wheelbarrow full of food. And the man looked at John, not with anger or fear, but with gratitude. And he said, "Thank you. I've been in here for about 3 days, and I was in here harvesting to bring food to the people in the valley down below, and someone came and just covered the entrance to the cave with a stone, and I couldn't get out." It had never occurred to John to think who had planted that garden, who had tended that garden, who had cared for that garden, who had watered it and made sure that the fruits and vegetables grew there. He just found it and assumed that it was his. But there, in the eyes of the frail old gardener, he realized that it had been the gardener's gift. And it transformed his attitude. And he began to help the old man in the garden to take that mantle on, to make sure that that garden was there to serve others in a time of need. How often have we treated this earth like this garden that we found? Or treat other people in it like, "You're as valuable to me as you are useful to me"? To have our name spoken by the gardener changes the way we look at the gardener's gift. That's the gift that Jesus gave to Mary that morning, the gift that is given to all of us by the one who knows our name. that this abundance we have in the world is God's gift to be shared, not to be hoarded, not to be abused or manipulated, not to be used for our own profit, but to be shared. May we learn to take on the mantle of the gardener and to share the gardener's gift. Amen.